Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video where I provide the extra context and information and juicy nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where am I going to start? Well, a bit of geopolitics and a bit of perhaps a rather impotent move from some in the Congress in the US, but it makes a statement, but there's also some interesting talking points around this. So Congress wants to boot Russia from the UN Security Council. So the Biden administration is also interested in watering down Russia's influence at the United Nations. It's by Jack Detch, who is well worth following on Twitter, actually. So two US lawmakers heading up an independent US government human rights watchdog have introduced a resolution that calls on President Joe Biden to boot Russia from the United Nations Security Council just days before the Kremlin's flagging full-scale invasion of Ukraine is set to hit its 10-month mark. The bipartisan Helsinki Commission, which called on US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to protest Russia's standing as a permanent Security Council member in October, wants Congress to argue that Russia's war has violated the purposes and principles of the United Nations and asks US government agencies to take steps to limit Russia's privileges at the UN, though it gives the administration some free rein to determine how it might act. In the congressional resolution shared with Foreign Policy, so this is the website Foreign Policy, Representatives Steve Cohen and Joe Wilson have said that Russia had committed, quote, flagrant violations, quote, end quote, of the UN Charter that call into question its right to hold a Security Council seat, including the illegal annexation vote in 4 Ukrainian oblasts, the perpetration of atrocities in Ukrainian cities such as Bucha, nuclear saber rattling, and creating risks to the world's food supply, all of which is absolutely true. Ukraine has also advocated for Russia to be removed from the Council, though experts remain skeptical that such efforts will work. The UN's governing charter doesn't contain any provisions for removing a permanent member of the Security Council. While countries can be removed from the United Nations altogether, doing so would require a two-thirds majority vote in the General Assembly, including the unanimous consent of the Council itself. Well, since Russia sits on that council, it's never going to vote itself off, and it's never going to Russia can't be extricated from the UN forcefully. So as the quote here from Louis Charbonneau, the UN director with Human Rights Watch, says, Russia would have to agree to it, and it's just not going to happen. China is also unlikely to agree to such a precedent. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting is this idea, and this has been bandied around since almost the beginning of the war, since people were talking about, well, how can Russia be on the Security Council and a permanent member, and they do this, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it because they can't be voted off without themselves voting themselves off. I mean, this is one of the issues with how the UN in the Security Council, at least, is drawn up. The fact that permanent Security Council members could become conceivably entirely dictatorial and evil and the worst manifestation of a state you can imagine and still remain on the United Nations Security Council because they're not going to vote themselves off is nuts. But one idea backed by the Commission, as well as some legal scholars, seeks to challenge Russia's status as the heir of the Soviet Union's seat at the Security Council. So the thing here is it's the Soviet Union that has a permanent seat at the Security Council. And the Soviet Union was made up of all of these now independent states, of which the Russian Federation is only one. There are some who argue that Ukraine could just as equally have that Security Council member seat. Now that's interesting. So as one of the initial signatories of the treaty that founded the Soviet Union alongside Russia and Belarus, Kyiv could make a convincing claim to be the only successor state of the Soviet Union not to have flagrantly violated the principles of the UN Charter and issue credentials for one of its own diplomats to take the seat. So in other words, Ukraine could argue that Russia is not the is not the Soviet Union. And in fact, Russia and a bunch of these other nations like Belarus are flagrantly violating those UN Charter principles. And so, therefore, since Ukraine isn't doing that, Ukraine should be the one sitting on the Security Council instead of Russia, who is not the Soviet Union. As deciding on credentials is a procedural matter, it would only require 9 of the 15 members of the Council to vote in support of Ukraine. Thomas Grant, a senior research fellow at the University of Cambridge, has argued the feasibility of such a plan remains a subject of debate. And 3 decades after Russia took over the Soviet Union's seat, challenging such precedent could also prove to be an uphill battle. Quote, "You're looking at 3 decades of recognition of Russia in its place," Shabanov said. But Russia's long-standing intransigence, along with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has gotten both the United States and Ukraine to begin thinking about the alternatives to diminish Moscow's influence. Speaking at the UN General Assembly in September, Biden called for reforms to the Security Council, including the possibility of adding more permanent and non-permanent members, such as for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The United States had also succeeded on Wednesday in ousting Iran from the United Nations panel on women's rights. Absolutely bloody right. That's a whole other kettle of fish. So that, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think much will come of it. But this idea here is the best, I think, route towards getting Russia off the Security Council. Is just to say, hey, you're not the Soviet Union, and it was the Soviet Union that decided this. So there you go. Moving on, I missed this from my frontline briefing this morning. And this is a briefing by the representative of the General Staff, Brigadier General Alexei Gromov. He said the following: in the course of conducting offensive operations, the Ukrainians advanced up to 1.5 kilometers in the area of the settlement of Dubrova. Now, what I think this means, but I might be wrong, is that's not 1.5 kilometers from Dubrova, but it's 1.5 kilometers from Kreminna. And I think that's what they're talking about here, which is to say, if we go down to the map here and look at Kreminna, if they are just 1.5 kilometers from Kreminna, then actually they are within spitting distance, and that's great news for Ukraine. What they do with that, what they do now with Kreminna, is a whole different question, and I don't know. The simple answer is, so let's say this is the utmost outskirts of there you go, that, so let's just try and move. So really, if you're 1.5 kilometers from Kreminna, you're there, you're really, really close. And that, it could be, you know, it could be that this is over here, and yeah, 1.5 kilometers, just incredible. But what do Ukraine do? You know, with the problem like Kreminna, and it is in such an important place, could be the key to unlocking all of these towns and cities in the area. But it is an urban area, and they aren't going to want to walk into Kreminna. It's going to want to be, the Ukrainians are going to want some kind of encirclement. But as I said in my update, in my frontline update video, yes, you could cut through the lines there. That's a railway line and a major road there. And you could encircle even further north from Chervonopopivka and Ploshchanka, which they appear to be trying to do. But I don't think this area here to the east is particularly safe, because I think the Russians would definitely be, you know, flanking, trying to cut the Ukrainians off there. So, and yeah, the Ukrainians aren't want to go straight into Kreminna and have some kind of urban warfare, because that would just be way too painful for them and cost too many troops. Anyway, interesting that if they are that close. Rheinmetall, or the German military manufacturing company, declares a new facility for medium caliber ammo production in Germany and will be finished by January 2023. Now, I don't know whether I think that's a facility that will be finished and then they can start making stuff. It covers 20 to 35 millimeter sort of rounds, could deliver first batches of Gepard Spag ammo to Ukraine by July 2023, pending orders. So that's brilliant. However, it's still July. It's still a long way away. And of course, Switzerland have a bunch of those, or other countries have a bunch of Swiss ammo that could go to Ukraine straight away. But Switzerland have put a kibosh on that and said, no, you're not. Our material isn't going to go forward to Ukraine. Amid a growing shortage of Soviet anti-aircraft missiles for Soviet SAMs, like the Buk and the S-300, which are the basis of the Ukrainian air defense system, true, I mean, this is from a Russian source, but true, Ukraine will have to resort to disproportionate use of expensive Western ammunition more and more often. So this, I think, it all sort of makes a lot more sense why why Ukraine is now getting in all sorts of air defense systems from outside of Ukraine, all these Western and NATO systems, and placing them everywhere. They have a lot of other systems, but they're running out of rockets for the S-300s and the Buk. And where are they going to get them? How are they going to get them? So it could be that they eventually have, fairly soon maybe, a whole bunch of redundant systems that are perfectly usable, operational, but they're just out of ammo for them. And this means that they will be ever more reliant on the West and NATO to provide those surface-to-air missile capabilities. Moving on to the UK, over to the general events, Britain has announced a new package of military assistance for Ukraine for £50 million, 125 anti-aircraft guns. So talking about your Gepard there, I assume these would be similar ones. Now, I know, as far as I remember, I'm fairly sure this has been announced before, but the UK don't have anti-aircraft guns particularly, and I think it would be a case of us sourcing them from elsewhere. We'll get you 125 anti-aircraft guns, but we might get them from all around the world, from all these different places. Dozens of radars and electronic warfare equipment against drones, really important technologies to counter the deadly drones supplied by Iran. So there you go. It's a bit of UK stuff there. It's the anti-aircraft guns. Sorry, that's our Defence Secretary. You can see him a bit closer now if you want. 125 anti-aircraft guns is the important one there, I think. Well, no, it's all important. So this is genuinely hilarious. I don't know how someone like Ramzan Kadyrov, who is your warlord, literally old school warlord, Chechen warlord, who is helping with his TikTok Kadyrovites in Ukraine. If you don't know what I mean by that, is certainly earlier on in the war, there were all these videos posted on TikTok about the Chechen fighters fighting, and all these videos of them doing X, Y, and Z. But basically, most of them were just firing their guns in the air or like aiming at nothing really and shooting off round after round. And basically, it was just so posing for TikTok. So they then got called the TikTok warriors and all this kind of stuff. Anyway. It's about self-awareness. Some people just don't have self-awareness. They just don't have it. Some people obviously think this is the height of cool. Like, this is so bad. Like, if I was involved in this, the only way this works is as a parody. This only works as, like, you're trying... It's like self-deprecating humor. You're trying to look like a dick. And if that's what you're trying to do, then I'll tell you what, Kadyrov, you've done a brilliant job here. This is a great propaganda video. You look awesome if you're trying to look really bad. First of all, I just want to comment how small he looks. And I'm not taking the mickey out of small people. You know, I'm not huge. I'm pretty average, I guess. But like, he's trying to present himself as this really big guy. Maybe that's why he's the only guy running. Any other person there would make him look small, and he definitely does not look big here. But it's just hilarious. It's not looking particularly sprightly either. But that's what we want to see. That's what we want to see. Him firing guns into the air. Good, excellent. That proves, I don't know what it proves. Virtually nothing, that you're an idiot. Yeah, now everyone's firing guns in the air. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and there, he was firing at something, but didn't actually fire at something. Just looked like he was going to fire at something. Anyway, main thing to notice is he's cut his beard. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so this is the skiff, or the so this is a system, the Stugna anti-tank weapon that is developed by the Ukrainians. Was developed by the Ukrainians, been absolutely fantastic during this whole war. In fact, you know, there's more footage of this by a country mile than javelins and NLAWs and whatnot, and that's maybe because it's easier to film and you get to look at the screen as well. So this is just basically what happened. Is yesterday, I think, some footage came out of a Stugna taking out a T-90. So that's your top tank that's got really good armor, and the question is, you know, how did it work so well? Not so much the penetration, but why were there no countermeasures going off for this piece of kit, this ATGM, as that you know, missile heads towards the tank? Why is it not firing off something as a defensive mechanism? So we're just going to explain that, and there it goes. Bang. And you'll notice that quite often with these, they aim above to begin with. Although he's not really doing it there. It's interesting. He's only just aiming above. Quite often they aim up above, and then what they do is they just, as a missile gets closer, they then pull it down on top to do that. It doesn't do it hugely there, which is interesting because that's what he's going to talk about. But from a lot of Stugna footage, it's what you see. So some people are asking why the countermeasure system did not help, why the smoke charges weren't activated from the T-90. First of all, as we can see from the image, the T-90 have only half of Stora 1, only the laser sensors and smoke charges, without IR dazzlers. So these these tanks have ways of being able to defend themselves from incoming laser guided missiles, using sort of infrared and smoke and, you know, all sorts. To activate this smoke screen system, you need to illuminate the tank with a laser, but this feature of the system is well used by Ukrainian Stugna skiff ATGMs. Okay, there's a bit of a translation issue here, but hopefully you'll understand. So this is a Stugna. What you have is you have the unit that fires off the rocket or the missile, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then you have this unit here, an operator, and this is connected to sort of a 50-meter cable, so they can be quite a long way from this person and look on a screen. So it's a two-man job, really. Look on this screen and aim the ordnance into the tank. So the Stugna or skiffs ATGMs on a control unit have two laser systems. The first one is LRF, laser range finder. It's that yellow bit there. And the second one is a missile guidance on the image control unit of the Georgian skiff ATGM. We can say that Stugna have some kind of autopilot, but this autopilot is in the control unit, not in the missile. Stugna in overflight mode does not illuminate the target. Laser is looking up. Missile is also flying about 3 to 4 meters up than the target is. So this is what I'm saying. They fire it above the target. So what happens? They fire it up. It goes along above the target, and then just before it hits the target, the tank, it will come down. All the while, I think the laser is going back to the actual launcher, and there's some deal of control from this guy with the control pad. so as the range increases, the laser gradually lowers to keep the missile at a constant height. A second before the target, the CEU lowers, so that's the computer system, I guess, lowers the missile at the height of the target or the operator. About 100 meters before the target, it starts to lower. So this is what you see here. It fires up, and then, as we saw in the other infographic, just before it hits the tank, it is lowered by the operator. The laser lowers. So the laser isn't coming from this rocket here, and that's how it broadly works. 50 meters before the target, already at the same level with the target. In this mode, the Stugna avoids highlighting the target and does not activate the countermeasure system. To do this, you need to know exactly the distance of the target, and that's why the Stugna skiff have a long-range finder. So laser range finder. So they use a laser range finder to find out the exact distance of the tank. Then they plug that in, and then they use that to talk to the missile. This is how I understand it. And the missile is talking to the system as it's flying along. And then, so therefore, the missile isn't sending out a laser to the tank, which means the tank can't detect that. And for some reason, it can't detect this LRF. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure you guys can tell me. Someone can tell me in the comments. And that allows the Stugna to hit the tank, and especially because they lower it just before it hits as well. So now it's clear why the countermeasure system on the T-90 didn't work and it wasn't activated. So there you go. That is the Stugna. Loads of I can't tell you how many dozens and dozens of videos I've watched of Stugna blowing up stuff. But there it is. Talking about rockets and missiles. So I talked about the Tu-41, which is this old school rocket drone that was fired at the air bases in Russia. I talked about it in my extra video yesterday. A chap called Jonathan, awesome name, said the Tu-141 is a drone, and if you change the capability by putting a warhead payload, then it becomes a cruise missile. I guess, that's what cruise missiles are. They're just drones with a whole big warhead on. Differentiation between cruise and rocket is in the engine. Cruise takes advantage of air in the atmosphere to create a thrust, while rocket needs oxidizer to create the thrust. So the Tu-141 uses turbojet, ergo is a cruiser. And I'm going to talk about what the truth says later, because that's something else. Anyway, this brings me on to what's the difference between a missile and a rocket, or is there any? And what's the difference between a ballistic missile and a cruise missile? I have talked about this a little bit before, but let's go over it again. New viewers and all that. A missile is a rocket-propelled weapon designed to deliver an explosive warhead with great accuracy at high speed. Missiles vary from small tactical weapons that are effective out to only a few hundred feet to much larger strategic weapons that have ranges of several thousand miles. Almost all missiles contain some form of guidance and control mechanism and are therefore often referred to as guided missiles. An unguided military missile, as well as any launch vehicle used to sound the upper atmosphere or place a satellite in space, is usually referred to as a rocket. A propeller-driven underwater missile is called a torpedo, and a guided missile powered along a low-level flight path by an air-breathing jet engine is called a cruise missile. Okay, so those Grad multiple launch rocket systems that shoot up, 20 rockets at a time, those will be rockets because they're not guided. They fire them up and they come down, and they use sort of gravity. You just aim them up at the right trajectory, and they follow that trajectory to their intended target. So although missiles can be propelled by either liquid-fueled or solid-fueled rocket engines, solid fuel is preferred for military uses because it is less likely to explode and can be kept ready loaded for quick launch. Such engines commonly propel tactical guided missiles, i.e. missiles intended for use within immediate battle area, toward their targets at twice the speed of sound. So that's supersonic. Strategic missiles, weapons designed to strike targets far beyond the battle area, are either of the cruise or ballistic type. Cruise missiles are jet propelled at subsonic speed, so that's under the speed of sound, throughout their flights, while ballistic missiles are rocket powered only in the initial boost phase of flight, after which they follow an arcing trajectory to the target as gravity pulls a ballistic warhead back to Earth. Speeds of several times the speed of sound are reached. So in other words, a ballistic missile has a load of rocket fuel that fires off to get it up to really, really high speed, and some can even, intercontinental ballistic missiles wouldn't be going out the atmosphere, whatnot. They'll be sent up at a really high rate of knots, and then gravity will, and the atmosphere and whatnot, will the world and its gravity will pull it back down to Earth. And you'll be calculating, the amount of fuel, the amount of speed that it takes off, blah, 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 and the trajectory will determine exactly where it lands. So you'll be adjusting these to work out where it lands. And then as it comes down, obviously it's gaining speed to some kind of, like, I don't know, terminal velocity or something. I don't know, some physics person can tell me. And then, it blows up the target, which is completely different to a cruise missile. Although it appears to fire at a greater, or travel at a greater speed. Almost all missiles are steadied in flight by stabilizing fins. In addition, guided missiles can contain control systems to adjust their flight paths. The simplest control. So I talked to you the other day about cruise missiles that Russia are using. They used to adjust them 3 to 4 times. Now they're adjusting them 40 times during flight because of the varying challenges that the Russians are coming up against with the air defense systems that Ukraine have in place. A more complicated system used the simplest control systems are aerodynamic, making use of movable vanes or flaps that alter the flow of air past the stabilizing fins. A more complicated system used especially in ballistic missiles, which often travel beyond the Earth's atmosphere, is thrust vectoring. In this system, the stream of gases from the rocket engine is deflected by placing vanes within the exhaust nozzle or by swiveling the entire engine. The guidance system is the most important and sophisticated part of the missile. In tactical missiles, electronic sensors locate the target by detecting energy emitted or reflected from it. For example, heat-seeking missiles carry infrared sensors that allow them to home onto the hot exhaust of jet engines. Anti-radiation missiles, so these are things like the HARM missiles, home onto radar emissions, while one type of optically homing missile may lock onto an image of the target that is captured by a television camera. Upon receiving information through its sensor, the guidance system relays instructions for course correction to the control mechanism through some type of autopilot contained within the missile, or through commands transmitted from the launch platform. So that last part is much like the Stugna that we've just been looking at. Ballistic missiles contain some type of inertial guidance system which compares the missile's actual speed and position to the positions that it must assume in order to hit the target. The guidance system then generates correcting commands to the control system. Inertial guidance has become so accurate that the United States MX Peacekeeper ballistic missile, with a range of more than 6,000 miles, more than 9,650 kilometers, has a 50% chance, so this is your circle error probable, of delivering its 10 nuclear warheads within 400 feet of their targets. So a 120 meter CEP is what that's saying for a 6,000 mile or 9,650 kilometer range missile. That's phenomenal. So there you go. Missiles and rockets. That should give you a little bit. Every day's a school day, right? And today's Thursday, and it is definitely a school day. Just want to go through a quote from The Truth to one of my recent videos. So NATO seems to be willing to push the envelope a bit more lately. I think the calculation has changed since Russia have expended so much in this war that they have become a far lower threat in general. At the start of the war, NATO feared escalation as the risk reward was not there. Russia were still seen as a big enough threat, but were losing a lot by invading Ukraine. Russia were losing just by starting the war. The risk versus reward was not good for NATO. Fast forward 10 months and the risk versus reward calculation has changed. I think there are two main factors. The general underperformance of the Russian army has taken a lot of the fear factor away. True. They've done, the second greatest army in the world. They're the second greatest army in Ukraine, and they're getting done by Ukraine, although obviously Ukraine have the support of the West and NATO. But they have certainly not brought decent kit to the war. They've not brought decent strategic and tactical decisions. They've not brought good plans. They've not brought good leadership. They've not brought well-trained troops. So yeah, not a lot to be afraid of in that respect. I think this is the most important one: the use of the Russian missile stocks. This has three parts. One, the interception rate is high, meaning multiple missiles would be needed to be launched to hit one target. Two, missile stockpiles are very low for Russia now. These first two combined mean Russia do not have the capacity to hit multiple targets with missiles in a war, if a war with NATO started. This is something I've talked about quite a lot before. This leads to the final part, escalation steps. By removing their conventional missile stocks out of the equation, they have removed the escalation ladder. They have two options: do nothing or go nuclear. Could Russia start the destruction of the world because Ukraine received air defense? What about Ukraine receiving main battle tanks? Is that worth full escalation? How about long-range missiles? Russia actually took away one rung from the escalation ladder with their missile campaign. NATO now has the high reward of Russia no longer being a threat to Europe, with a lower risk of escalation due to the rungs of the ladder being removed. In conclusion, expect NATO to be bolder with the equipment they deliver, and Russia to respond with more vague nuclear threats. Brilliant point, really well set out. Absolutely agree. I've been saying this. They've only got nuclear to go to now. Like I, when I was a teacher, used to say, don't shout in September, right? If you shout at class, right, you've gone to the max. Right at the beginning of the year, so we start the academic year in September. So if you shout, then you've got nowhere else to go, right? You want to leave your shouting to the end of the year, so that, oh my goodness, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, and he sounds like that, or whatever technique it is. I'm talking about shouting as being like the last sort of last rung of that ladder. But this is the case with a nuclear war. Like, don't threaten nuclear war straight away, right? And then find out that you don't deliver on that straight away, and then that gives people permission to push and push and push. You should be threatening other things and other things before you get to that final one, and then you can actually put those things in place. But you've gone all out early doors, and actually really your cupboards are empty, Russia, in terms of what threats you can offer. Though those missiles aren't there, I don't think you're going to do chemical warfare because the world will just jump on you for that, so on and so forth. So I think this all kind of feeds into the conclusion that Russia can't win this war. There's nowhere they can go. There's nothing you can do apart from throw more boots at them, the Ukrainians, and try and get into bed with people like Iran. Which, if your best mates are Iran and North Korea, then man, you've really got to have a look in the mirror, because turns out you're a bit of a dick. Anyway, thanks. Right, finally, we've got the daily live stream by Alexei Arestovych. He is a spokesperson for the Ukrainians. Dmitry does a good job of summarizing and translating. There's just a few bits that are worth picking out. First of all, of course, we hear about Putin cancelling his addresses. So he does these press conferences, but also like an annual sort of Christmas address, and all of them, everything he was planning on doing has been cancelled. So this kind of signifies the uncertainty around the whole conflict. And he would have wanted to, I think he did this in 2014 with the annexation and with Crimea and Sevastopol. He used that to be the basis of his sort of Christmas speech or whatever. Well, of course, other than Bakhmut potentially, which certainly won't be taken by Christmas, he's not going to have anything. So he's cancelled them all, and it's not looking good. So Arestovych expects no annual speeches by Putin in December. The dictator terrorist has nothing to present to the Russian population at this point, nor to offer any bright prospects and promises of Russia's retaliatory measures. Putin cannot report any encouraging figures. They all show downward trends. Russia is waiting for any diplomatic and military achievements before Putin addresses the assembly and the public. Another reason for not making public addresses is his deteriorating physical state. So Arestovych explained this comment from an interview with Dmitry Gordon during a stroll in a cemetery. It was not a forecast, but an an assumption that Putin might die in April 2023. They discussed the end of the war. Arestovych expects the active fighting to fade by midsummer unless a black swan event, that is Putin's death, takes place earlier, say in April. In that case, the war will end much sooner. Fascinating stuff. So there you go. So that's his. That's that. Hungary is just really annoying the Ukrainians by being pro Putin, I guess, and pro Russia, and not allowing a whole massive aid package to come Ukraine's way. So that's annoying for them. And then we have some talk of Russia's planned offensive. So the Russian military political command is trying to seize the initiative at the front. Arestovych expects from them to begin in mid-December, any moment now, and attempt to gain territory by February to present something to the population on the anniversary of the war. He likes dates and he likes symbolism, Putin, so that would make sense. The offensive will be drawn out, similar to what they did in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and are doing in Bakhmut, as they lack resources for a quick offensive. The plans are there, but may not be realized. Ukraine is not going to wait and watch. So there you go. Quite a few bits of interesting stuff on that thread, and that's really great that Dmitry translates and summarizes them. Interesting that there is this worry still. So Arestovych talks about the Pentagon not finding any cases of misuse of Western weapons supplied to Ukraine. So the idea that Patriots could, or any weapon that America provides to Ukraine, might fall into the wrong hands, and this is why some people are reticent to give Ukraine so much weaponry, is that that tech can be exploited by countries who end up capturing it. The thing about the Patriot is you'd have that hanging around somewhere like Kyiv, right? You're not going to put the Patriot near a front line. These are generally going to be to protect, I would have thought, to protect major installations and cities, and they have a very low probability of being captured. And you could bet your bottom dollar that if Russia did look like they started invading into Ukraine in such a way that they could capture those bits of kit, that America would be wanting to do something about that. But there you go. Anyway, hopefully that was useful for you. Bit of chat about all sorts of stuff. Thank you so much for all your support. If you want to show continued support, please pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP, and that /ATP allows my channel to get a little bit of commission if you grab any stash that shows your support of the Ukrainians. You can get yourself a fanny pack. That means something very different in the UK, but in America, it's a bum bag. You can show your support of Ukraine there with grabbing one of them. But there are lots of ways to support my channel. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I have to say a massive thanks to those who supported me on Buy Me a Coffee recently, or always and ever. There's some hugely generous people out there, and also those who are members of my channels. That's just hugely generous. So thank you for all those wonderful people out there who do continue to support me, but also thank you for the wonderful people who watch and who comment so fantastically on the threads. Really, truly appreciated.